participants. It is an honor to convene this interactive forum on India-U.S. relations, revisiting immigration and its impact on diaspora and aspirational youth. The movement of people across borders has significantly shaped the political, economic and cultural landscapes of our nation. The evolving nature of India-U.S. immigration continues to influence not only the diaspora, but also the aspirations of the youth navigating global opportunities. Today's discussion will critically engage with these dimensions, offering diverse perspectives from scholars and experts in the field. Now I invite our chairperson, Professor Pramod Kumar, to offer his observation and academic reflections on the theme.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Suchi, for making such a comprehensive summary of the whole problem of immigration. At the very beginning, I would like to thank Professor Virginia for suggesting this topic, because it was her on her suggestion that we organized this roundtable, and she took the initiative and told us that this is the subject she would like to speak on. And also, grateful to my friends from Japan, Professor Yoshida, also very kindly agreed to speak on this subject from Japanese perspective, or from the perspective which is global and which can help us to understand the phenomena in much broader context. And then we have Professor Ronkiram, Professor Kuldeep and Professor Mehta, and of course Professor Dipankar Gupta. And I'm really grateful to him, because it's only in the last moment, only 2 days before, when I requested him to attend this interaction and sum up the whole discussion and raise some of the issues which we can keep debating. For me, why I thought that as a chairman I will take of this session, I'll take the liberty to speak first, because I thought many more experts are there. So I may not left with any point to make. So that's why I thought that I must say a few things in the very beginning. And especially because coming from Punjab, and Punjab has been forefront, and which we normally say the immigration infection is an ever slumbering fever in the arteries of every red-blooded Punjabi. So therefore one has to somewhere start with that, because one also finds that the plight and aspirations of immigrants could not draw the attention to the needs of the population, migrating in hordes, violating laws, social binding to risk their lives for a distant future. So we didn't pay much attention to these issues in academia as well as in public policy making frameworks. The focus of the state agencies continues to be on the tightening immigration controls and upgrading legal response to detection, investigation and prosecution. But the human angle of why this is happening, as Professor Suchi has concluded with this, and how to respond to the human rights violations and protect trafficking victims, is addressed only in passing. And why I mentioned, because it is a historical problem. The travel bug can be traced in the early years of 20th century. The movement of these can be located in 3 phases of globalization. The first phase of globalization, which started sometime in the 1870s, and as most of the literature has said, that 1870 to 1914 has been characterized as the age of laissez-faire. The movement of goods, capital, labor across borders were almost unhindered. There was no passport required, and about 50 million people left India and China at that time in this phase. And to illustrate, a group of men who traveled by train from Punjab to Calcutta, onwards in an open deck steamer to Hong Kong, and then to Canadian Pacific liner to Victoria, Canada. And these early migrants were Sikh soldiers and farmers, mainly single males. And the Trans-Pacific steamer fare cost a 1 hectare of agricultural land then. And that was in the last decade of 20th century. In the foreign, these immigrants were exposed to exclusionist policies, leading to sometimes anti-Oriental riots also. And the second phase of immigration started with, slightly coincided with it around 1919 to the mid-60s, was known for the imposition of various restrictions on immigrants. This was marked by the incidents of Kamagata Maru in Punjab. The passengers of the ship were sent to prison and few hanged. This brought into focus racial discriminatory policies also. I'm only touching these points. And the third phase, which is considered as the age of globalization, despite stringent laws and restrictive consular practices, the number of migrants in the world, excluding the former USSR, I'm quoting data from one of the articles published, where he said that 99 million to 221 million people went abroad in 2015. This marked a shift from manual to professional to skill-based immigration, moving out legally. And this has put Punjab potential immigrants, largely manual workers, in a disadvantaged position in the third phase of globalization. And there are 5 categories of cross-border movements. One is immigrants and refugees, and then guest workers, illegal immigrants, and professionals, which is in the third phase of globalization. These were there. The first two, it was immigrants and refugees. The developing countries, as it has been mentioned by Professor Suchi Katuria, has been main source of guest workers and illegal immigrants. And the total number, she mentioned about the undocumented Indians, were around 42 lakhs. The number of Indians deported since 2015, the data has been given here, and which is there on the screen, which is the data is from 2015 as it was presented in the parliament. So clearly the globalization has increased the labor mobility. At the same time, labor mobility of skilled professionals is almost as mobile as capital. As capital has no barrier, so is the professional immigrants. They were as mobile as capital was. Similarly, where it is not feasible to import goods or capital, export capital as a substitute for labor imports, the use of guest workers has increased. And despite the stringent immigration laws, the reality of globalization, let me underscore, will sustain, perhaps even increase illegal immigrants as markets are apt to circumvent the laws. So therefore, illegal immigrants in the coming few years going to increase. Whatever restriction may you impose. The whole issue of pull and push factor, which has been mentioned here, I think that should merit also our attention, because if I may say, the driving force behind immigration, largely my experience is from Punjab, is shaped by pull factors in the so-called foreign dream and need to beat the labor shortage at the place of destination. For the country of destination, it is a kind of want and need paradox, which means we need you, but we don't want you. So this paradox has been prevailed historically. So that is, at the place of destination. And for the immigrants, it was kind of a negotiating position in the form of, as asylum seekers, they attributed to political and social persecution. Why I mentioned it at one point, sometime in 1989, I also happened to be one of the consultants with the U.S. Immigration Department. They used to refer to the cases where people, when they interrogate or talk to them, they will mention that they are being prosecuted socially or politically. And they used to verify from some of the people around the world, that whether it's a reality or not, what is the actual truth about it. So most of the push factors were not relevant when you reach there, because it was actually the dream, whether the push factor of poverty or of any kind of unemployment, they were the push factor, but they were not negotiating positions. The negotiating position remains that I am socially and politically prosecuted, give me asylum. That was the negotiating position, and which means the at the place, and then at the place of transit, it was neither need nor want. That you are transiting from certain spaces, you are neither needed there nor they want them. So therefore, for you, it's a kind of a different situation. But at the place of destination, it's we need you, we don't want you, and at the place of origin, it was a kind of a demographic dividend that they go there, they send you the money, and also it was a kind of realization of the dream of the potential immigrant. These two factors combined, which means the sender's country, for the country it was dividend, and for the immigrant it was a dream. So they allowed it to function under that. So the reality is not dichotomous. It is actually more nuanced. And therefore one is trying to understand this, the pull and the push factor, because here we say there is unemployment, that is why people are going, or there is a debt there are property prices are increasing, that is why it's giving. No. Because the professionals from the cities are going in a legal route, and for people, those who are unskilled, they are going on the illegal route. And they spend 50 lakhs and they may be spending 5 lakhs only. That's entirely different. And foreign dream, our daughters, our sons also have. And many people sitting here, they may find these dreams is almost there with everyone. And why attack these illegal migrants and say they have this dream and that is why they are mobile. We are also all want to be mobile. So therefore I think that this kind of a place of origin, transit and receiver, that one has to understand these three different situations where the place of where you come from, there is a need and want converges, whereas at the place of transit, they don't want it, they don't need you. At the place of destination, it's a paradox, need and want. That we need you, we don't want you. So therefore I think that the story of this situation becomes complete, if I may say so, with the risky travelogues from below 0 degree temperature cockpit travel to Malta tragedy to seesaw battle from one country border to another without food and water. It also has innovations in carving new routes in Southeast Asia to East Africa to East Europe to North America and so on. It has a families migrating repeatedly from one destination in Africa to the United States, to Canada, to Europe, involving several generations. So its entire picture is somewhat but more complex. The sufficient evidence suggests that immigrants have been used for building the comparative advantage of a country and acquiring competitive edge in the global market. The paradox is that on the one hand, the global trading rules are continuously evolving. Newer mechanisms for facilitating the unregulated flow of capital and products across the national borders, the same rules do not apply for the labor. Human migration is not subjected to global standards of equity, justice, citizenship, and livelihood rights. Further, while trade agreements are backed by the teeth of enforcement, human rights treaties are governed by utterly weak enforcement mechanisms. So therefore, I think that this requires a little more serious consideration when we have to formulate any policy and any intervention framework. And lastly, I will only mention Punjab and say one or two things on that. The policy planners in Punjab, for me, they have to wake up. Punjab has been principal source of immigration and provides lucrative business opportunities for the legal and illegal immigration trade. The increased price of land, annual NRI remittances of around $3 billion, even more, and the urge for the overnight status enhancement has made illegal immigrant racket as an established business. In the search of prosperity, they risk their survival. To attain the foreign mystique and status back home, they earn dollars even in engaging unclean, quote-unquote, occupation. To maintain the hell of being a martial race, many a time they meekly submit to racist insults and humiliation. It is a saga of their tremendous capacity for physical endurance. It is a story shaped not by merely property-induced mobility, or agrarian debt, or repressive political regime, or urge for social enhancement, or competitive prosperity for their neighbors in villages. Perhaps all these have been neatly woven into this ever-evolving drama of human exploration. There is a near absence of any policy regime, particularly in Punjab, having all the positive factors like forward linkages with the short community sport, the spirit of adventure, and the capacity to learn foreign languages. There was a need to build a capacity of aspiring youth in response to the different kinds of specialized and expert labor force needed in the receiving country. The energy and potential of Punjabi youth have to be channelized for productive purposes. The incidence of drug addiction and illegal ventures to foreign land by a large number of Punjabi youth may accelerate the process of decay of Punjabi society. Therefore, there is essential, we should see this process not in a dichotomous way with urban and the rural. It is a desire, I mean, which persists with almost every section of the society, and we are migrating either legally or illegally. But we have to build the capacity of those who are deprived to acquire that capacity, and those kind of systems should be brought in place so that people can migrate, explore the world. Everybody has a right to explore the world. When rural youth goes to abroad, we say Punjab ta khali ho raha hai. When our children go there, Punjab is fine. There is no threat to Punjab. So, I mean, somewhere, I mean, those people also have a right to acquire the capacity and travel abroad and take higher education and acquire skills and look after their future generations the way they want to do it. So therefore, I basically think that somewhere we have to be a little more serious in terms of human rights violation, which happens in this illegal kind of migration, and through this defense planes of incoming, people shackled into it. I think, I mean, somewhere many of us should think about it, raise our voice that how, I mean, undignified transportation of these people is being done. They may be illegal, but they are still human beings. And somewhere I find, and then you want them also, but this kind of pretext through which you humiliate them and shackle them and send them back, I think is absolutely, I mean, wrong. And we must, I mean, think about it, try to raise our voices at any forum, wherever we think that it's going to be relevant for us. Thank you very much for this.
To begin, I invite Dr. Virginia Van Dyke to share her analysis. Dr.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and even more delighted to see some people here that I haven't seen for a very long time, so it makes me feel welcome to be here. I'm going to do something just a little bit different than what I see other people have focused on, is I want to talk about the relationship between the United States and India in the context of immigration policy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration policy, because this connects to the extent to which illegal immigration, to use that term, or undocumented people or unauthorized people coming to foreign countries wouldn't happen as much if there was a more better routes, legal routes that people can follow. And it's often said in the United States, and certainly among politicians, people say, oh, the immigration policy is broken, our whole immigration system is broken, and so we need to have a comprehensive immigration reform bill that will solve some of these problems and facilitate legal immigration. But this is something that's extraordinarily difficult to do because there's all kinds of different opinions on what that might look like. And so I want to talk a little bit about relationships between India and the United States, focusing on how that manifests itself in immigration policy, or how immigration policy also impacts the relationships between India and the United States. So I want to start off with just presenting two vignettes that illustrate some of these points that I'm going to try to make. And the first one, we'll go back a little bit to 2013, and it involves negotiations between President Obama and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who had a very good relationship between the two of them, a lot of rapport. It was also a time of good relationships between India and the United States. There'd just been a nuclear arms agreement between the U.S. and the United States. At that time, even though India did not sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, still there was an agreement that India then was acknowledged to be a responsible nuclear power. We all know that India had always been a responsible nuclear power, but this was something that at that point was more acknowledged by the international community. So one thing I'm trying to highlight here is just the difficulties of, they say to make a cake, you've got to break some eggs or something. Just the difficulty of crafting immigration reform. And interestingly here, President Obama very much brought Manmohan Singh into his negotiations and was very concerned and considerate of the perspective from India. Because at this point, looking of course at higher skilled immigration, they weren't talking about less skilled immigration, as we talked about before here in this forum, but the whole issue actually around H-1B visas and what the cap should be, etc. So President Obama, and I hope, do you have my, yeah, thank you. President Obama very much wanted to liberalize
What
an
is
immigration. Yeah.
CIR? What is CIR?
CIR bill.
Comprehensive immigration reform.
Comprehensive immigration reforms. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, comprehensive immigration reform bill, I have on a different side, I call it the elusive comprehensive immigration reform bill. Everybody wants one, but it never seems to happen. Instead, politics ends up focusing on piecemeal kinds of reforms, such as the big making it legal or making it illegal for the DACA policy. Some of you might know what the DACA policy is. That's delayed action on childhood arrivals. So people who were brought over as children into the United States, and when they had no say about that, are not subject to the same kind of restrictions as people who came of their own volition. So, as I was saying, President Obama was trying to push through a liberalized immigration bill. Very ironically, in his efforts not to look too soft on immigration, he ended up being known as the deporter-in-chief. And the reason they called him that was because he had cracked down on immigration coming across the border and deporting people who were coming across the border, because in trying to get a coalition together to pass his immigration bill, he needed to bring on board Republicans who thought that he was being too soft on immigration. So on one hand, he was going to be tough on immigration by strengthening the border, and on the other hand, he wanted to liberalize rulings for people to be able to come to the United States. So his goal was to expand family reunification, and he had this, I think this is a great policy, he wanted automatic green cards for people who graduated from the universities in the United States in STEM fields. And so his proposal was that green cards should be stapled to diplomas, which would be nice to get a diploma with a green card stapled to it. And working for an easier path to citizenship, etc. So he wanted to make it easier for skilled immigrants to come. So in 2013, his bill encouraged raising the cap on H-1B visas, but greater scrutiny on those people who were getting the visas, and also greater scrutiny on the companies that were hiring them and what wages they were paying them. Because one of the concerns about this highly skilled immigration then and today is that there's a concern that people coming from India or other countries working in the United States in highly skilled capacities in some tech field might be being paid less, and that would depress wages. And so the concern was bringing people over would depress wages and not protect the jobs of the already American workers who are already doing those jobs. And there's been several studies on whether or not that actually happens, whether it depresses wages to have people coming in and working these jobs, some of them contract jobs. But the studies aren't conclusive. Some say that in fact it does depress wages, others say that in fact that it doesn't. But that was the concern. And so in introducing these restrictions is when the conversation started up between President Obama and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who expressed to President Obama that the concern from India was that because if you start making an H-1B too stringent and the regulations too stringent, that this will be a bad public relations look for the United States. It might discourage people, Indian workers, whether they might want to come to the United States. It might discourage professors to encourage their students to go to the United States. So the argument was that this was not, that India was very much against this kind of scrutiny on H-1B. So Obama promised that he would take this issue into account. And as I say, it became a source of negotiation between India and the United States, rather than the United States just saying, this is what we're going to do. But it was a source of discussion. Ultimately, the bill, and you might have guessed ahead here, ultimately the bill was blocked by the Republican-controlled Congress, which is an example of the challenges of guiding a comprehensive immigration bill through the system. Because U.S. immigration policy remains a complex interplay of what seems political expediency, executive choice, and I'm going to talk about later the difference between Biden and Trump's choices on immigration, which is a very dramatic change that we've seen. Congressional decisions, court rulings, interest group pressures, temper of the times, there's all these things that can block immigration reform from happening, which of course, as I mentioned, immigration reform would help facilitate legal immigration. Okay. The second vignette is more contemporary. I want to talk about, we know about the personal bonhomie between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi since Trump's first administration. And it seems like those two have a good working relationship and have been able to evolve some very positive things out of the last meeting, for example, between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. Had some good, very good strategic outcomes from that. It's also evident that President Trump is moving away from the old way of looking at international relations and kind of restructuring what the international system would look like. So he's moving away from multinational kinds of institutions, which of course was something that Biden really played up in multinational type institutions, and moving towards more bilateral relationships. So having one-on-one relationships with different countries that they can work with rather than trying to work through multinational organizations that have really been the forum since World War II, when those forums were initially set up. Prime Minister Modi, as we all know, was one of the first to come to the United States and have a one-on-one meeting with Trump, and did a very good job of representing India as a country that was ready to do business with the United States, building on that former relationship that they'd already established. And he was very widely praised for this. Ashley Tellis refers to this as Modi makes magic, and referred to Modi as having been able to disarm Trump's normally bristly self by working a little at what he calls Modi makes magic. And C. Rajamohan wrote in Foreign Policy that India is in what he called, it's in a sweet spot. And what he meant was that in the change of these international relations, that Modi and India, is able to position itself in such a way as to take advantage of this new strategic environment. The turn away from Europe more towards Asia, the normalizing of relations with Russia takes some of the pressure off India, because India has continued, of course, to have relationships with Russia. So that some of the changes in international relations is going to be very favorable to India on the world stage. So without taking away from the successful agreements that they made in their meetings, it's all over the news, and it's already been referred to, is President Trump's mass deportations. And of course, these don't just affect India, but they certainly do affect India. And in fact, in some ways, in a kind of a magnified way, because there were some groups of immigrants that were deported without being put into military planes and shackled. So it raises the question of why exactly that happened. But President Trump clearly sees himself as fulfilling a campaign pledge by doing this. This was something he promised during his campaign. Perhaps he's intending that as a deterrent. The less pleasant being deported is, the more likely people are going to be, or less likely people are going to be to try to come across the border. India is being very diplomatic in its response, and argues that people who are not authorized don't have the right to be in a country where they're not authorized, is willing to take back. As long as people can prove that they are Indian citizens, happy to take these people back. We've heard very little about what rehabilitating these people would look like. I think maybe someone's planning on speaking to that, but I've heard very little about what that rehabilitation might look like. But there's all kinds of humanitarian and U.S.-Indian issues here that we can talk about and refer to. India has been very active fairly recently, just in the paper yesterday. I'm sure some of you saw that, in interviewing the people who have been returned, finding out exactly who the agents were that facilitated their trip, and trying to crack down on those people, and those people more widely that guide these people on these long, torturous trips, taking all their money, and in many cases, particularly now, they got arrested as soon as they landed in the United States, so they went, impoverished their families and possibly themselves for naught because they were immediately returned. So and it is a little bit of a contrast because I'm not sure how we would think about that, but just the very friendly relationships that India and the United States have manifests itself in very public action that I think most of us would condemn. Let's have a graph here of the graph of immigration to the United States from India, just showing the rapid increase that's taken place in the last few years. So in talking about the centrality of India, the diaspora, in these vignettes, I want to just touch on the Indian diaspora and how politically, socially, and economically influential it is. Not news to anyone in this room, I'm sure. But it's a link between the two countries, and it's very much impacted by immigration policy, and actually is involved in speaking out about American policy as well. So just to highlight how central and significant the Indian diaspora is, you can do it on the next slide. Oh, that's not what I expected. Can you go forward again? Or back?
Back.
No, can you go forward and then forward again? There's what I wanted. That was what I wanted.
This
Thank
one?
you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm not in order. So the Indian American community in the U.S. has grown from 1.9 million in 2000 to 5 million in 2023. So extremely rapid growth of immigration. Last year alone, 78% of the H-1B visas were issued to Indian professionals. Among startups in the United States, 20% of what they call unicorn startups. And unicorn startup is the one that makes I don't know the exact figure, but a whole lot of money, very successful business. 20% of those were founded or co-founded by individuals from Indian or the Indian American community. So skilled immigrants in the United States are seen as essential to America's technological competitiveness and to its growing economy. Now, many Indians and Indian Americans have become household names in technology and business. And I just want to point out, it's striking how many people from this community, Indian American community, have very notable positions within President Trump's administration. This includes Kaishar Patel, who's now the head of the FBI, Sri Ramakrishnan, who's Trump's artificial intelligence advisor, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's collaborating with Elon Musk on this dodge policy of going through a lot of the departments of administration within the federal government and kind of randomly firing people. Nikki Haley, UN ambassador during Trump's first term, and of course Trump's vice president's wife is of Indian origin. The Biden-Harris administration set a record with 130 Indian Americans in key positions, including of course Vice President Kamala Harris herself. And so I just have a slide here that of interest that the number of very major corporations who are household names have Indian or Indian American CEOs. And several of these have been very outspoken on the issue of immigration. Arvind Srinivas, who's the CEO of Complexities, Artificial Immigration, exemplifies, or sort of a poster boy, I would say, for immigration challenges. Despite being worth $9 billion and employing 100 people, he's been waiting 3 years for a green card. And he speaks out very publicly, and as do some of these others, about the frustrations with the kind of labyrinth American immigration system, where you come in on an H-1 visa, has found a very successful company, you possibly can't still get a green card or citizenship. Okay, get to the next slide, or go back to the one I had you skip. Yeah, that one. Yeah, thank you. So the United States policy on immigration, as I mentioned, has emerged between relationships between India and the United States, and also the emergence of India as a world stage. Of course, as a caveat, I should mention, Indian immigrants have historically been a small percentage of people who have come to the United States, with movement across from Mexico and South America being the most for decades. But now, of course, India has a lot more people immigrating, and so that system is changing quite a bit. So the trajectory of the relationship between India and the U.S. has been one of in the direction of rapprochement from the somewhat distrustful and suspicious, I would say, relationships between the Cold War era, especially exacerbated by Pakistan becoming the most allied of allies in those years. But and it reveals a progression between the overtly racist policies to policies designed to combat this, with two major bills in 1965 and 1990. So I'm not going to talk about all these points on the slide, but I just want to highlight, except for the one on the bottom, that these were all either events that happened or legislation that was passed of basically a very racist perspective, and the idea was to stop immigrants from coming from Asian countries, and some of these were directed at India specifically. This picture I have here is from the Kamagatu Road, which Dr. Pramod mentioned. Was a ship that evolved from, I'll say one more word about that, from what was called the continuous passage legislation. And the idea of the continuous passage legislation, and this was Canada, not the United States, was that if you couldn't immigrate unless you could take a steamship from where you started from, your point of immigration, to where you're arriving, presumably the Vancouver Harbor, which is where this picture was taken. And there were no steamships that did that. You couldn't do that journey. And so that was considered to be a very clever way of stopping Indians from being able to come to Canada. But in fact, some enterprising soul chartered a ship, chartered the Commonwealth tomorrow, and sold tickets and brought them to Vancouver Harbor, where the people that were there were unable to disembark. They were sent back to Calcutta, as Dr. Pramod mentioned. Some of them were arrested, some of them were shot. Actually, some people died there. So that was one very draconian way to try to stop immigration. But there were other kinds of legislation just that was very explicit about not allowing people to come in. And in fact, the first thing on the list, the 1790 naturalization law said only free white persons of good character could be naturalized. So basically just saying that people who come from Asian countries could not become immigrants. The big change was the bottom point there, the Loose Seller Act, that repealed the Bhagat Singh Thind ruling. And that ruling had said that Indians could not become citizens, established a very small quota for Indian immigration. So in 1946, 100 Indians and 100 people from the Philippines would be able to be nationalized. And this was during the time of the Cold War. And the United States was interested in trying to establish good relationships with developing countries. And wanted good relationships with India, was concerned about Soviet influence. And so these very small beginning of the liberalization of these laws, very much tied in with wanting to have good relationships with the new countries, up and coming countries. Can you do the next slide? Yeah, so we just have three successes, major successes. The one in the middle I won't talk about because that really didn't affect India. But in 1965, there was major legislation that was passed, and this was the beginning of the educated Indian American community in the United States. It was in 1965. It went a long ways towards building the educated and professional expatriate community and ties between India and the United States. So India's relationship with the United States really warmed under President Kennedy, particularly his support for India in the Indochina War in 1962. There was the issue of food aid that was given in 1964 and 1965, although that didn't come without strings attached. Still, there was food aid that was given by the United States during that period. It was begun by Kennedy after his assassination. It was shepherded through Congress by by Johnson, President Johnson. And President Johnson was an architect of some civil rights legislation in the United States. He saw this as a continuation of that. With more civil rights in the United States, extending to more civil rights for people wanting to come to the United States. So it gave preference to educated individuals and to family reunification and to refugee status. So the majority of people who came at that point were educated people, rather than some of the less educated migrants that we were talking about earlier. So the Bush immigration bill also, same thing, was a groundbreaker in just expanding immigration and allowing more educated people to come. It raised legal immigration from 270,000 to 700,000. It introduced the diversity visa program, which was a green card lottery. Established temporary protective status for certain individuals, and the big thing, establishing the H-1B visa program for qualified applicants that, as we know, most people coming to the United States to work in tech jobs are using the H-1B visa. The next slide. And this is just a graph of the HB1 visa caps. Interesting how little they've actually changed over time. There was initially a spurt in how many that were given out, but then it sort of leveled off and it stayed basically level for some time. Okay. So the most dramatic change in immigration has happened recently, and I think we're all aware, happened with the Biden-Trump exchange, because President Trump had very draconian types of immigration reform. What he called immigration reform, I suppose. Biden really thought completely the opposite. And so when he came into power, everything was flipped. And then when Trump came back again, everything was flipped again. So you have, and I think for people who are wanting to immigrate to the United States, it's be extremely difficult trying to guess who you're going to be dealing with, because the policies changed so dramatically during that point of time. There was a subtext in this debate on cutting down the numbers of H-1B visas, but really the biggest focus here is on closing the border and making sure illegal immigrants don't come across, or undocumented, I should don't want to use that term, might come across. And there was a number, used to be a small number of Indians in that group of people that cross the southern border, but that has certainly increased. So I think President Trump's immigration policies are fairly well known. I'll just touch on a few of them. There was a lot of rhetoric about building a wall. There's a ban on immigration from certain Muslim-majority countries. There was family separation at the border, so people crossing the border with families, they would separate the children and the parents. And this was intended to be a deterrent. He also cut back on the number of H-1B visas, not by changing the cap, but by increasing denial rates. So more people that were applying didn't get passed. He suspended new visas during COVID. He narrowed the definition of eligible positions and raised the minimum wage that people had to be paid. So all these different steps had the process of cutting back on the number of H-1B visas that were being issued. Okay. Biden's goal was to change all that, and he changed everything that was possible. He reduced ICE's deportation practices. He proposed legal pathways to immigration. He reformed DACA, which President Trump had tried to eliminate. He targeted parole for certain populations, raised the refugee admission numbers, which Trump had very much cut. There was an app that was issued to people who were in that they could wait in Mexico until they had a refugee clearing appointment. So people would get this appointment on their phone through the app. And then some people were waiting in Mexico for as much as 6 months, waiting for their appointment. They would then cross the border and meet with an immigration authority. The day that Trump was inaugurated, that was turned off. People already had appointments on their phones. They just shut it off. So there were large numbers of people crossing the border. And I have here a statistic. Between October 2022 and September 2023, nearly 97,000 Indians were caught attempting to cross illegally, with over 30,000 detained at the Canadian border and 41,000 at the Mexican border, according to Business Standard. Now, one of the interesting points about this change in immigration is that people are not only crossing the southern border, but crossing from the northern border as well. And you touched on this in your talk about people. And I would just add to your story about tragic things, sometimes happening to people who are immigrating. Some of you might have seen in the paper that there was a family with 2 children trying to cross over the border from Canada, and they got just within a few feet of the Canadian border, but they hadn't dealt with the weather. Apparently, weren't aware of what the weather was going to be, and they ended up freezing to death right outside the Canadian side of the border, right when they were wanting to cross over. So. There was a big spurt in immigration that happened during Biden's term, which is one of the reasons that President Trump was able to say, oh, there's a crisis at the border. People are just pouring across. There were a large number of people pouring across. So what do we know about why was seen as such a porous border? And to what extent was that true? Some people talk about there was a perception that was more open, and the perception was probably greater than the actual reality of it. But in fact, there were large numbers of people coming over, and they were overwhelming the people whose job it was to stop them from coming over. And so some people were able to just get way through. They did this thing called catch and release, where people would be stopped, and then they would just release them into the United States. There are also new technologies available to the immigration travel agents. We've already talked about people who are facilitating these trips. But the spread of this is not so much crucial to Indian immigrants, but people who are migrating from other countries. The spread of the internet has been very dramatic in South American, Central American countries. So people are able to go online and there's chat groups online. People advise each other how to cross the border, and these immigration agents are able to take advantage of much more different circuitous routes, as the map showed us, in order to guide people across the border. Okay, so what do we know about these immigrants that are coming across the border? I'm basically here talking about the surge that happened during Biden's administration. And here I'm drawing on an article by Abby Budman and Devesh Kapoor, who wrote a piece called Unauthorized Indians in the United States, Transit Development. And according to their analysis, it'd be no surprise, that the largest group of individuals coming across the border are people from Punjab. Of these people that are coming across in the surge. After that, Gujaratis. Groups, of course, that have traditionally gone abroad and sent remittances home. So there's established, that kind of a pattern has already been established. The largest number of those requesting asylum are Punjabis. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a slide of Indians encountered at the U.S. border. And you can just, I mean, the spurt is pretty evident. There was a huge spike that took place around 2023, 2024. Okay, you can show the next slide, please. And a rise in Indian migrant encounters at the U.S. border that shows both the southern border and the northern border. So interestingly, as I mentioned, coming across the northern border from Canada wasn't that common before, but it's something that people are starting to do now. And the method that this is being utilized by is that it's easier to get into Canada. In particular, it's easier to take admittance at some of the colleges in Canada. So people are taking admittance at colleges in Canada. They call them diploma mill colleges. So they have the admittance, they get into Canada, but they don't actually ever go to that university. They may just stay in Canada and work, that's a possible thing, or they may use that as a jumping off point to want to come into the United States. So, can you do the next slide? So I'm also showing here new asylum requests by Indian nationals for major destination countries. And as immigration peaks, it's obvious that asylum peaks are going to happen as well, because as Dr. Pramod mentioned, that's one of the major ways of coming to the United States is by claiming asylum. And So the Punjabis, the people from Punjab state, are the most successful at asking for asylum. And the reason we already touched on was that they're able to utilize concerns about what the politics are like in Punjab, whether or not Khalistan movement is making people, Sikhs particularly that live in Punjab, being unsafe. And so that is used. And is quite successful. That particular argument has been quite successful for people who are able to get asylum. We know that often some of these individuals that do come through this route, through the southern route, do not necessarily have the academic credentials or language skills to come as a highly skilled job applicants. So they're coming, taking a different route. Or even if they are highly skilled individuals, there's so few legal routes to utilize that this coming across the undocumented route is something that people use. And overall, these are not impoverished individuals that are coming. I think this was already touched on as well, because one, it's expensive to travel. You need to pay the travel agent. You need to be able to travel. So these are people that have some resources, either to have land they can sell, or they have some money they can borrow. Many times they already have a relative abroad, or they've already worked somewhere abroad, and then they decide that they want to go to Mexico. So certainly, deportations for people who have taken out significant loans or spent significant time in the United States, leaving all the available impoverished people, create social isolation, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the very negative impacts on people who have left India and then been deported. I think, do I have one more slide then?
No.
That's it, okay.
That's the last
That's my slides. Okay, so I'd like to leave with the point of giving the fluctuating nature of immigration policies under different administrations. I think it's essential to recognize that these political priorities in the United States can lead to a great deal of uncertainty and challenges for people who would like to immigrate and wonder when they should do it or how they might do it, and for the U.S.-Indian partnership as a whole. And so I think new policies need to be put in place to give some sort of certainty as to what the future is going to look like or what the best road is to take, so you don't have a situation like happened here where everyone, I hear the border is open and rushing to try to get through. before the policies change again.
Thank you.
And I invite Professor Osamu Yoshida to contribute his insights.
Thank you very much. I think that Japan sent a lot of migrants to many countries in America in the past, but so that we have a lot of Japanese communities in those countries. But that is a phenomenon really in the past, before the Second World War, and these days we do not send so many people. Maybe because of the decline of the economic situation in these days, some young Japanese want to find the jobs somewhere within Asia or in the United States or somewhere, but that is rather exception. So that's what I would like to put my focus on today's seminar is some recent attitude of the Japanese government to the policy of Trump, as well as the immigration policy in Japan itself, to some extent. Maybe you find very different reactions made by the Japanese government to the most of the policies shown by Trump administration. That is to negotiate with him to get some exception for Japan. But the exception can be made in exchange for the very big compromise from Japanese side, particularly in terms of import of the weapons from that country. So that, as you know it, former Prime Minister Abe promised President Trump to increase the Japanese military budget twice, double. And then now the Trump administration is requesting Japan to increase the budget triple. So maybe the current Prime Minister of Japan, Ishiba, will accept this kind of demands. So that in exchange for accepting all these demands, the Japan is expecting that a certain exception can be given by Trump. That is a Japanese reaction to the Trump administration. But this is not really new. Maybe we can see the very similar reactions followed by conductive Japanese government. Maybe from the time of 1960s onward, when Japan could reach certain economic development stage, and we could record for the first time the trade surplus vis-a-vis the United States. So that's from that time on, we always deal with the relations in terms of the economic or financial issues, and we may give in some of the concession to them in exchange for our export of the goods to the country. So that's although what Trump is demanding is very much larger than previous president of the United States, particularly the Republican president. But what Japanese reaction can do is almost the same. And but from the time of Reagan administration, the pattern that the Japanese prime ministers so far followed were to make friends with the Republican president, so that they could give some how to say outlet that their government, I mean their Japanese government could have a very stable relationship with Japan. And in the past several years, we could develop a very, very close relationship with India. And that was within the framework of the Quad or some kind of Indo-Pacific context. And so that Japan's relation with India was very much extended in past decades or so. But it is very much unfortunate that we could not work together to have a much better negotiation with the United States, particularly when we are separately pressurized by the United States government. So that's for Japanese government to change the course of actions vis-a-vis the United States, I think that this is a time that bilateral relations between India and Japan was very much tested. But in regard to the immigration policy, you may know that Japan followed very, very restrictive immigration policy for anybody from outside. And that is probably possible because of the our possession of the very, very rigid population registration system. So that anybody in Japan, including the Japanese or non-Japanese, were strongly and well registered by the local government. So that once you enter into Japan and your visa may be a bit longer, you have to register yourself in a local government office. And you always have to keep the foreigner's card. And that card give you some room for maneuver, but all the room is well defined by the law. So that, for example, in the case of the students from abroad, they are allowed to work in some places nearby their residence. Maybe half of the working hours that were allowed to the normal people in Japan. And if their working hours may exceed the hours, the universities of their belonging will be cautioned. So that, for example, we have to tell the student that you have to work so many hours or something like that. But and also in terms of the providing ashram, you also know that we have a very, very restrictive policy. So that just a few people in a year are admitted to stay in Japan as a refugee. So all those policies were very much criticized in Japan, but the Japanese government is very slow to change all those policies. So that we always feel that more and more pressure from international community may be so much important to change the policy of Japan. But of course, that's kind of change can be made only the united actions between the international community and the Japanese civil society. So I hope that this occasion of the very strange policy adopted by President Trump could be made as a chance for the more united actions to change the rules and policies followed by those government to be more liberal and more universal. Thank you very much.
Now, I request Professor Ronki Ram, because he's in a hurry, and rest assured he will not take more than 10 minutes, because he's in a hurry. So I request him that he should remain in a hurry and finish within 10 minutes. Thank you, Professor Ronki.
Limit is more important.
Thank you very much,
That's created.
Professor Pramod Kumar. And I will take up only those points which have not been mentioned over here. And it's very interesting that Professor Pramod's lecture and her point towards Punjab is relevant. But let me share with you something very important. Punjab was the region where people used to come, never used to go outside Punjab. This is one point. It was much later when migration started from India. And much later after that, people started going from Punjab to different countries. Migration from India started in 1834 to 1916. By that time, 50 lakh people migrated. But that migration was under indentured contract system. It was not, migration for on their own. So this migration was to the East and West Indies, to the North and South Africa. These were the areas where people were taken from, Chota Nagpur and and the Madras Presidency for, growing of sugarcane and some of the rubber. And from Punjab, migration started, in the early, late, not till 19th century, early 20th century, 1920s. From here, migration also started in the same mode that migration took place especially in Kenya and Uganda. And for that even, the migration from Punjab to Kenya and Uganda was only from a particular skilled person called Ramgadiya Sikhs, not many others. They were there for laying down the railway lines, railway tracks. So this is something very, very important which we understand it. As far as migration to Japan is concerned, because till the end of the Second World War, Japan was not a developing country. Japan was a developed country. Japan was equally competing, in the share of the world, and it was there. It was the domination by the U.S. and especially the Pax Britannica that Japan was suffocated and tried to push aside. Japan was trying to have a Asia, Pan-Asia prosperity region, trying to create it. At that time, very interestingly, from Punjab as to the Kenya and Uganda, skilled people went. From Punjab, some people also went to Japan. Actually, people from India used to go to China, to Malaya, to Singapore, this area, as chowkidar, night guards, who later on were motivated to go to North America, especially Canada and United States of America. Because during the Golden Jubilee years, they went along with the Golden Jubilee celebration in different Commonwealth countries, where they come to know that these countries are very rich. If we are getting very small amount of labor charges in China, nearby China, Taiwan and Singapore, Malaysia, why not we can go to that? Even after Golden Jubilee years, once those soldiers retired, they start going to America. But whereas to Japan, they did not go for any non-skilled job. They went there for education. It was in 1900, Professor Puran Singh, as a young graduate, he went in Japan, Tokyo University, to study pharmaceutical chemistry. He was there in Japan from 1900 to 1903. After that, many years, Ras Bihari Bose went to Japan. He came to Japan in 1950. He stayed in the house of Nakamura, bakery's owner. And he married his daughter, Toshiko. And later on, Nakamura came to be known as Bose of Nakamura. That was the relation with Japan of India. We know that Vivekananda went to Japan. We know that Tagore visited 3 times Japan, but our relation with Japan was of very high order. No, before that, our relation with Japan was through Buddhism. It was never budding. Of course, by December 2023, about 50,000, exactly 18,835 Indians are settled in Japan. They are mostly traders from Gujarat, few from Punjab. They were trading in Japanese silk and all this. They are very good settled here. So this is a very good picture. But now, one is intrigued to know when such situations start developing in Punjab, where we start getting desperate to go there. Because Punjabis never desperate here. Everything was here. It was only in the 1950s when the vouchers was issued by the Britishers that some people who did work in British administration, they can go there. At that time, no passport was required, nothing was required. Few people from Punjab, those were ex-servicemen in the British Empire, they went there. But in 1950 and 1960s, people started migrated in large numbers. But it does not mean people did not migrate. People did migrate to New Zealand and to Australia in the late 19th century. There are 2 books for students who can read it. For New Zealand migration, Professor W.H. MacLeod's book is very Punjabis in New Zealand. It was from 1912 to 1921. There were, I have some data with me, there were 212 Punjabis in New Zealand. But he gave a very good data. Who were the Punjabis? They were the farmers and the laborers. Farmers were the peasant community, laborers were the scheduled caste. Out of 212, 133 were peasants. They do agriculture. And out of 212, 24 were scheduled caste. And out of these 133 peasant people, 133 only from Doaba, Hoshiarpur, Kapurthala, and Namashar, these areas. And out of the 24, 22 are again from this region, from the scheduled caste. Now you see, all those richest people in New Zealand, in Australia, who have thousands and thousands of acres of land and well business, they are the progeny of these people, those who are 212. This was a story in that. But for New Zealand, MacLeod, and for Australia, Kissinger's book, Bilaspora, very interesting book. But when we find it to the North America, when people start migrating from this region, as I told you, the ex-soldier and again for education. By Santokh Singh for education, from my own village, Babu Harnam Singh for education, Kartar Singh Srapa for education. It was only Dodar Sahab, Jwala Singh Thatia and Son Singh Bakna. They were the one. But they became the owners of thousands of land. Holton farm was owned by Jwala Singh Thatia and Son Singh Bakna, especially Jwala Singh Thatia, who was a great leader, and after coming to Punjab, he was elected unopposed to the Punjab Provincial Assembly. So they were there as a potato king. They were the people to whom they invited, to the graduate, Lala Hardayal, and other people. They established hostels over there. They established fellowship over there. Many scholars, Gupta Sahib, they went there to study PhD on their fellowship. They were the farmers, but they are inviting people to study. See the quality of migration from here. And these people, for the first time, they established their center. First in 1913, Professor Puri has done a full book on that. Stockton, Pacific Coast, the Qadar movement, and the Stockton Gurdwara, the first Gurdwara. If any Punjabis go to California, to that region, all Punjabis, they feel very happy to settle here. They take them to 2 sacred places, Stockton and the Jugantar Ashram. So this is the itihas of history of Punjabi migration. It was not desperate. They are not going, for drug trade or not going from disgruntled movement. No, it was there. But when they thought we need independence, in India, all of them they came one by one. Millions of dollars business they left there. Thousands of dollars they brought with them. And all of them either hanged or they were put in Andaman jail, or after that they were interned in their villages. That was the story. This later on started a new trend in 1950, 1952. 1950 to 1960. Only in United Kingdom. Here I want to tell you one thing, very interesting. At that time passport was issued, started getting passport is something, big thing also. Because you need some surety, either land or a house, something. So scheduled caste from this region who went to New Zealand in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century, at that time passport was not required. Thereby out of 212, 24 scheduled castes were able to land in New Zealand. Now for them it was difficult. But luckily, one of their fellow, his name was Diaspora. He became the PCS officer in Punjab. He became in 1952 the passport officer in Punjab. He started issuing passport to scheduled caste, 500 passport every year. How he started issuing scheduled caste passport? Because scheduled caste did not have an inch of land, nor the houses in which they were living, the land underneath the houses were there. It was the land which was called Rajatnamas. That land was not there. So he removed this condition. He said if they won't have land, if they won't have their houses registered in their name, how would they go? He convinced the administration, okay, you can give them. He took his own surety, I will give them. 500 passport every year. So now scheduled caste and peasant community, they start rushing to Wolverhampton, Birmingham, Leicester, some area South Hall. It became place. But quite interestingly, they did not only migrate to do work, they also migrated with them, their caste. Mark Gildersleeve's book, Religious Rebels of Punjab, says how they have sharply divided, much more than they were divided here in Punjab. So migration did not make a change in their mental makeup. They remained, but they were here within the Punjab. So that did not make any change. You see that with migration you get exposure, you get advanced, you get this and that. This is an unexplored area of study. How migration did not make any changes. No, this is something we find it quite interesting. But now, what is the current situation? Current situation is very interesting. Here people are not going for education. They do go for education. 27,000 crores has gone from Punjab in 2018. It's a record. 27,000 crores. 1 crore is 10 million. Who are these people? Those who are plus 2 pass out. There are in Canada only 200 these education shops were opened. Where the people go there? 1,25,000 people went to Canada, that is with me, for small courses. Which courses? Which then get them some jobs in the tertiary sector, in the ancillary sector, where they are not qualified for that. And after reaching there, they won't go for study, they start finding a job. It was here the question comes, where the unemployment, no industry in Punjab, the fear of drug, that the children of the rich people who can afford of, because going abroad for study in the first semester need 18 to 20 lakh for securing admission. That same amount is required to live there for 6 months. So now for 6 months, these children are expected to send some money, remit some money to back home, to pay the loan, or to get some money working overnight over there to pay the next semester fee. Otherwise they would be deported. So they are under tremendous social pressure, economic stress. There they won't get a job because 18 hours or 16 hours, 20 hours is the limit. So when they go beyond 18, 16, 20 hours, they won't get a job in the white people's concern, because they fear it, that if they employ someone beyond the fixed hour, they will face the music. But they go to their own fellows who have their business. They fleece them. They won't pay the amount $10 for an hour, not like that. They give them $2-3. So they live in a very dingy condition. This sort of new migration and that experience has totally changed the scenario, where you won't find it. And secondly, the law of capital accumulation prevails. In the 1950, 1960, they were a first generation. They started sending money. There was no restriction. They can send as much money as they want to back. Nobody opposed them. Everybody was saying that the European countries and American, states are very good. They won't put any restriction. They had a restriction, you can't bring your wives. But after some time they allowed them. Thereby in the beginning of the migration, Punjabis married mostly the Mexican woman. It's very interesting. But later on, that condition did not apply. Now what happened? First generation sent money, they made big houses, palatial houses. First generation sent money, they add to their agriculture. If you ask someone, because MacLeod asked in his interview to the local people, why did you go? We went there to maintain our land holding. Because we were 4 brothers, we have a 20 acre land, but after our 4 brothers married, we got only 5 acre each. We want to have 20 acre each. So all of them, they bought land. The second generation also tried to come back home in Punjab. They come, they spend money, they go to Harimandir Sahib, they go to other places, whatever their faith is, and they do marriages here, second generation. That was there. By the second generation getting older, the houses are given free to those who have come from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh to work. They start taking care of their houses. Now, if idea spread that these houses would be taken by them, that was not at all. Nobody was going to take their houses here. But something else happened, which our social scientist has ignored. They couldn't understand. What was that? The third generation thought, we won't know anyone there, what to do. But it was not even third generation who want to sell the property. No, it was a law of accumulation in the capitalist economy. The profit gets, stacked in one place, poverty spreads. They knew that those European countries, whatever money they send back, the day will come when the money will come back. Now, all those palatial houses, all those lands, which is fertile land, all those land on the nearby the bypass, which is a 10 crore per acre, 1 crore per acre, there is on sale. The third generation boys and girls come, they indulge in succession warfare, the succession conflict, advocates are making a lot of money. Not only the IELTS center making money, no, advocates yourself making a lot of money because they are saying we will solve their problem. If you can give us 10%, all the money is going from where it came in the form of remittance. This is very interesting. No article, not a single newspaper report has come on it. I come from a village, I am trained, in IR theory, but social sciences, I am a student of social science. My study was on IR, but I did of the last 30 years work on social anthropology and social history. My work is on deras in Punjab. At that time, many people say, you are totally disgruntled from study. Why are you studying dera? Now, quite interestingly, everybody wants to study dera. It has become a subject. No? So I find these things. So I started working on this area in the last 3-4 years, trying to understand it. Every time I go in my village, meet people, try to take notes. This information is from scattered sources and scattered interviews. I hope 10 minutes are over. Okay, thank you very much.
Professor Deepankar Gupta to present his address. Professor.
Right now.
Super great.
Well, thank you very much. It's my turn now, and I am supposed to give the valedictory address. To begin with, let me thank our 3 speakers. Ajit? who've spoken on different issues. Professor Van Dyke's summation of the immigration policies in America and how things have changed over time, including the number of people who are coming into America as migrants, and the difference between the Biden administration, the Trump administration particularly, is quite interesting. And when it comes to Japan, I have always been quite intrigued by the fact that how Japan was able to solve its menial, what we call menial labor problems without resorting to immigration. And I think this is an area which most of us do not pay too much attention to, but I somehow feel that Japan needs to be commended for this fact. If anyone who goes to Japan will tell you right away that in Japan, people we consider to be, not quite middle class, are actually very skilled and proud of their work. And that I think is something which the other countries, other developed, prosperous countries, did not take that route. They took the easier route and allowed immigration of unskilled workers to do the kind of jobs that their own people were unwilling to do. So Japan, I think, has a certain lesson for us all. And I think that we should pay attention to Japan, not simply in terms of how many people went to Japan, but how did Japan do so well without yielding to the easy temptation of getting cheap labor from outside. Professor Ronkiram's paper, I think, presentation raises 2 or 3 very significant issues. Some of you might remember that yes, Lala Harda, or the Gadar movement went to the US, to Europe, to UK, of course. But what strikes one is that it is only after independence became a reality or a near reality that people in those migrants from India in those countries began to stake their claim in terms of civil rights. Till before that, they didn't think about civil rights and they took their humiliation in subjugation. But after independence was on the horizon, and when independence actually came into being, that Indians in the West started clamoring for civil rights. And as some of you will also notice, that not just Indians, but other nationalities too, like the Japanese and the Chinese, and most interestingly in my observations on the subject, have been the Haitians. Haiti was the first Caribbean country to become independent, and the first black assertion of civil rights was amongst the Haitian people in America, and Professor Van Dyke probably knows more about it than I do. But the generational differences between migrants in the West is also significant, not just in terms of what Ronki said about property, but also in terms of their own identification. To use this as a kind of springboard to the larger problem, and the larger problem, as I see it, is this, that migrants take time to shift the intellectual and emotional gear from looking at their place they've come to as migrants as simply a space where they are going to earn money, send money home or whatever, to a place where they have an emotional attachment, and that takes a lot of time. So that becomes you kind of a membership to this new area that their grandfathers or great-grandfathers went to. I see that in my own family, my final side rather, not my wife's family rather, how the third generation over there in Canada, they see themselves as Canadians, whereas the second generation saw themselves primarily as Indians, primarily. And within a generation there's been a sudden change, and now most of them see themselves as Canadians, and they look at us as some kind of oddity, strange people from the old country. Very often I've heard them saying, that so and so is from the old country. So this idea of being a member of another country takes a while to happen. And as I think Ronkinam has rightly said, that by the third generation they want to really snap ties, which are no longer they consider important, whereas their father and grandfathers were so keen to maintain this connection with India. The other thing which I noticed also with migrants is that many migrants, not only to the United States but to Europe, Arabs to Europe, Arabs to the United States, UK, Indians, they become much more crusty in their understanding of their parent culture abroad than their cousins in the home country. You know, they become much more protective and defensive. This is something which is very interesting.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, because
This also creates problem with the families.
sorry.
This also creates problem with the families.
Well, that is true, but this kind of rigidity also creates problems with the families, especially between generations.
Yes.
As you talked about generations, which is why this idea occurred to me. I've seen very often that the third and fourth generation Indians, who look like Indians, by the way, because the parents are making a point to marry them off to Indians, they often feel that they often ask them questions at a very young age, which they shouldn't be asking. And the questions are like, should I obey my parents and go to the temple as they force us to do? Should I even get married? And if I get married, how should I get married? So these are the questions which a 19 or 20-year-old shouldn't be bothered about. At least I don't think in our country we think so deeply about these things, but they do. They're really concerned about this. And there is a generational gap culturally between young migrants and their parents. In France, for example, I found that the militant Muslims, Islamic people in France, were the ones, unlike their parents, thought France was their home. And they were, felt that the French Republic was their republic. And then they felt betrayed by France. And because they felt betrayed by France, betrayed by their longing to be part of the French community, that they turned to radicalization. Their parents, who were much more devout as Islamic Muslims, they saw France as a space, not a place where they have any emotional attachment. It was a space where to work, and they thought of Tunisia and Morocco and so forth as their real home. And they were working here to make money and send it home, or maybe go back themselves. But their children and grandchildren began to identify with France. And because they began to identify with France, and they felt rebuffed by French society, that they turned to militancy. So you have in the same family a very devout father or grandfather who is not a militant, and a not so devout son who is a militant, because that son has feels spurned by French society, and that feeling of resentment comes out in terms of Islamic radicalism. And I think to some extent this might explain an aspect of radicalism amongst Indian immigrants in the West as well. So with these remarks, I now open the floor to some question answers.
I have one, not a question, but
And just may I finish one second, just 1 second. I don't know how much time do we have, so can someone entertain me on that?
We have enough time.
Enough time? Oh gosh. Well, if you have enough time, we can ask questions, but even if you have enough time, let's make the questions as brief as possible.
sir, I have one observation that a new thing is coming up, and that is earlier people who went there used to come back and get married to girls from India. Now that girl used to take little time to adjust and to to be in that system. But now a new system is coming, especially in America. I've seen that the girls are also there. They have also gone for studies, and boys have also gone for study. Indian boys, Indian girls, and they get married in the Indian this thing. and they have no, they do come and visit their parents, but there is no sending of money back to parents.
Yeah.
It's a different phenomenon which is arising, especially
Yeah.
a lot of Indian students, boys and girls going there.
You see, there's another thing which might interest all of us. That is when, I think it was mentioned earlier, that in the beginning, men went out from India, single men. And it was very interesting because the Indian men, single men from Punjab, who went to, say, Canada, shores of Vancouver, it's very, very interesting that when they came together, they formed a Gurdwara. There were no women. And they were not very particular either which religion should be represented in the Gurdwara. In fact, one of the major Gurdwaras in Vancouver in 1910 had is Muslim as the chief of the Gurdwara, because it was a community affair. As time went on and women began to come in, that's when culture established itself.
Actually, I think perhaps you are referring to Hussain Rahim, the only Muslim name. He was a Gujarati Baniya who adopted the Muslim name for a different reason.
No, I don't think that's the one I'm talking about. I have a letter on that.
This will have to be checked.
Yeah. So then, when the women came in, families, became consolidated, and with the consolidation of family, culture, as we know it, became much more dominant. And boys came to India to get married to girls. Girls came to India to get married to boys, and the girls stayed back, and the boys took their brides home. So the girls often in the family felt alienated from the parents, because the parents brought them here and left them in an alien country, whereas their brothers went back home with their wives. But all that has changed now. I don't think boys and girls over there. But I've met several families where the boys still want to marry girls from India and not Indians in Canada or USA, because Indian girls in Canada and USA are much more independent. While the Indian girls can still be bullied around.
So there is classification in that also. There are girls who have been brought up there, who have been born there. But then there is another group now which has studied here, born here, brought up here, but only for their masters or for higher studies they have gone to America.
Yeah.
It is that group of urban class which is attracting these boys.
Okay.
Now looking to this, present change, I was thinking expatriate nationalism has been a very significant phenomenon. Whether Tamil NRIs, Tamil people outside, or the Kashmiri people outside, or the Punjabis, Khalistani, whether hereafter that kind of radicalism which always expatriate people always had, greater degree of radical nationalism, supported with money particularly, and other means, maybe even arms, whether this is going to change with the coming of a new way of looking at the migrants. In Canada, for example, the so-called Khalistani element is pretty vocal, pretty strong, not in America as much, but they also were assertive in Australia and some in even New Zealand, but much more in Canada. Whether hereafter you see some change in that way of functioning.
Okay, let's ask our panelists, do you have any comments on this, Mr. Rangani?
Well, it's a fascinating question, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I mean, it does seem like those networks are still very lively in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so thankful to all present here on dais, off dais, especially Professor Dipankar Gupta, who has joined us for this event, Professor Pramod Kumar, Chairperson, Virginia Wright, our esteemed expert in this area, Professor Osamu, and all the dignitaries present here. So from today's discussion, we have come to possibly to a consensus that there is no single perspective attached to this, and there are there are many pluralities attached to the immigration process. Also, when we talk about the revisiting immigration, we certainly would have certain images, reflections in mind from today's event. And we thank so much to the panelists who have shared their ideas with us and given us new hopes that would certainly solve this problem in days and future to come.